Thank you for coming today. Welcome to Paper Boat Booksellers. We're really excited to have this event today. I'm really interested in hearing about this book and seeing the slideshows, so thanks to Paul and Jean for coming, and to Clay Eals as well for asking us to do this event. This was wonderful. He asked us about this event and showed us this book right after we opened, and it was a definite yes, because this book is beautiful, and again, I think that it is a very interesting book about, the Seattle now and then. I'm always interested in the history and different pictures of what things used to look like and what they used to be like. So thanks for coming, and here in the doorway we have some coffee from Youngstown next door, some water, some chocolate, so help yourself maybe after the event or during.
So you have some chocolates there?
We do. You want a chocolate?
Yeah, I'd like a chocolate.
I'm going to get you a chocolate.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
Thank you very much. You gave me one.
Well, wants to know where the nearest donut shop is.
Yeah, well, next door. Everybody, I want to introduce myself. I'm Clay Eals. Many of you know me from being connected to the Historical Society and all kinds of stuff in West Seattle, and it has been an honor to be associated with these two guys. I'm the editor of the book, and I wrote the introduction of it, and this is fantastic. It's a best of book, and you have a real treat here in seeing this presentation. And so I want to introduce Paul Dorpat and Jean Sherrard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
I'm
for
not
having
going
us.
anywhere further unless I can have another chocolate. Are there any more chocolates there, Jean?
There are, but I'm going to give them to you as you answer appropriately. I'll slip you one.
Nancy did it. Thank you,
Nancy, don't give him any. He'll get too excited, and he'll start leaping up and down. And he gets a chocolate when he behaves.
What are we going to do tonight here, Jean?
Well, we're going to talk about this book. Paul started his column in 1982, and the two of us started working together in about 2004, formally with a book called Washington, Then and Now, which was published by a Colorado publisher, and so it finally went into print about 2007.
Hey, by the way, I just ran into their letter of bankruptcy.
Yes, yeah, they went bankrupt. They tried to do a state book for all 50 states, and they only got down, I think they did about 8, and then finally went into bankruptcy. But they'd done many, they had several imprints.
God, these are great chocolates.
Okay, so we're going to launch straight into the book. We'll do maybe 25 comparisons and talk about the stories associated with them. What I decided was my job in bringing out this book was we went back to the beginning of Paul's column, back to 82, and started looking at sort of favorite and illustrative columns over the years, and then I went back and reshot the modern photos. Now there were several instances, because most of these photos were shot last year and the year before. There are several instances where you will see things that already were in then territory with our now pictures.
So it now becomes a then.
Now becomes a then. So we're going to move on through and tell some stories, and the very first shot in the show here is the very first column that was published in the Seattle Times in January of 1982. And so this is the 63rd Coastal Artillery in spring of 1919. They had just come home from the First World War, and they were Seattle boys, and there was a huge welcoming party, and you can see all the banners and flags and welcoming them home from a couple years on the front lines. And Paul went back there, and we'll see where this is. So I found that my job is not just to go to the spot, but to find something that reflects an atmosphere. And in this case, this is 2017, January 21st, I believe. It's the Women's March, the first Women's March. And I thought, well, that's a fairly large I guess not a celebration, but it's a fairly large, substantial repeat in which we're at the same spot, and that's Westlake, right in front of us, and this is 4th and Pike. So the largest march in Seattle history seemed like a fair approximation of the welcoming home of the 63rd Coastal Artillery.
Gene,
Yeah,
in this group, we have a World War II vet
we do.
who came home after finishing the war. Emil, right here. Right here. And what is he worried about right now?
He's worried about the Husky score. Well, welcome home, Emil. And you know, I had an uncle, Emil, so Swedish uncle. Swede?
My parents came from Yugoslavia.
Oh, Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Emil's a. So here we are. This is the photo that Paul took that accompanied that 63rd Coastal Artillery photo in probably the fall of 1982. It was proposed to the Times, and they started running it. So that means, if you want to do a rough count, it's been about more than 1,800 columns that Paul has done. We chose a little over 100 subjects out of those 1,800
Yeah.
to put in the book, and it goes all the way back to the beginning. So here's the original photo that Paul took with his pal, the barista.
She wasn't a pal of mine. I
She
mean,
looks at you like she was a pal.
No,
You're
no,
holding
we
the
got
photo.
along well.
Yeah. No more chocolates for you. And here it is in the book. So the book itself is designed to cover these, you know, to have everything kind of in facing pages. And we really we decided to do full bleeds on many of the pages to get rid of white space so that we could look more closely into the pictures themselves. So let's start now. That was the very first column, and the book itself proceeds through the columns consecutively as based on date. So we jump now to and this was later in 82, several months into 82, and this is Seattle's deepest snow in 1880. And what's kind of lovely about this photo is it shows probably towards the tail end of the snow, looking up at First and Cherry. And the Elijah Ferry, the territorial governor at the time, in
And that rhymes
'79.
with cherry, by the way.
Elijah Cherry.
Ferry cherry.
Yeah, Ferry and Cherry. Elijah Ferry had just written a State of the Union, like a territorial State of the Union, and it was published in the Times on January 4th of 1880. He'd written it for the year 79, and in that he states, Seattle weather is incredibly clement and gentle. We rarely see snow, and the same day that article came out in the Times, 80 inches of snow began to fall, or 64 inches over 8
Getting a little
days.
higher than I remember.
Yeah. So, but over that week-long period, 64 inches fell, which is the deepest snow Seattle's ever had. Now, Paul, will you tell us about this building, and I'll get you another chocolate.
Well, that's. Oh my gosh. That's Yesler's Hall. You know who Henry Yesler was? You guys probably do, don't you? So at that, the southeast corner of Cherry and First, or what was called Front then, was that hall he put up, which was immensely useful for all sorts of events, from weddings to parties to theater. And they tore that down just before the Great Fire of 1889. And you go up the hill to the top, which is up around 6th Avenue. Not the real top, but the top as horizon shows itself from 1st Avenue. And there's the Baptist Church up there on 4th. And below it, the house that has some definition was the sheriff's house. And the sheriff, we've got a nice story about the sheriff, but let's move on.
Okay. So I went back, and a couple years ago, I have to tell you, I've been at every time it snows for the last 10 years.
He's been very disciplined.
I run around town and try to capture snowfall. There's one location in the past 10 years that it's particularly difficult to get a layer of snow, and that is at First and Cherry. But this is a great photo, and I've always tried to repeat it, and I came close a couple years ago.
Where's the snow, Gene?
It's all over. And I want to point out that there's a little pile on the hydrant right there. And it was snowflakes that, so in other areas, I mean, that down at Pioneer Square, it was actually had about an inch remained, but at First and Cherry, there's a warm draft that comes down and maybe from the freeway. So there's sometimes you know, the success is dependent on, there's a weather fail occasionally.
The freeway.
Well, this is a classic photo of the Seattle waterfront, late 1890s, by the great Norwegian photographer Anders Vilse. And he has his back to Pike, and he's looking back at the waterfront from the docks. And this is one of those examples. He was a magnificent photographer, and he came to shoot the railroads and then spent several years in Seattle taking pictures before his wife forced him to go back to Norway. She read him the riot act and said,
I think she tricked him.
You think she tricked him?
Yeah, he agreed to come and join her after she went early to be home with the family at Christmas in Norway. Then when he got there, she told him, I'm not going back to the United States. We're going to be living here. And he agreed to it.
Well, before he was tricked back to Norway by his wife, he took some classic photos, which are sprinkled around different collections, but this is a wonderful shot of the waterfront. And going back there, you'll see that it's an example just taken a couple years ago, but of course, the then, the now incorporates what is today a then. Well, those are my kids at a little school I teach theater and Northwest history at on the east side, and I take them down to the market once a year, and then down to the waterfront.
What's the name of the school?
It's called Hillside, and here they are dancing with joy on the waterfront. So at this point, we of course have lost this great structure that stood there for 60 plus years, and Greg Nichols was talking to us, one of your neighbors was talking to us a couple, 3 weeks ago, and he made the point that the viaduct was essentially a 65-year-long placeholder. That if we operate with thoughtfulness and wisdom, we can turn our waterfront into something kind of magnificent. But if the viaduct had not been there for the 65 years, it would have very quickly filled up with crap. So he said, now we have a chance. If we're going to embrace that and make it really wonderful, that's the question. There's some wonderful designs out there, but now we have a chance to do something really special with this newly open waterfront. So I loved Greg's comment that held the place. It was a bookmark.
That's why he was mayor, Gene.
No, yeah.
That was the then picture now. Oh my.
Yes, exactly.
Has anybody ever asked you why the piers are at an angle?
Yes, and we have some good stories about that, but we're not going to tell them now. We will tell them, remember that question, and then we'll come back to it when we get to a pier. How about that? Because we'll be down in that property because those first docks. Thank you, Henry.
I'd like to hurry forward to hear what your response is.
I know what it is.
Well, I'd like to hear it.
Well, the trains can't come at a 90-degree angle.
You can't do that. We're not to talk about it now.
I'll point at you when we get to a slide that might be more, that might show some of those docks.
May I ask a backward question?
Yeah.
The little house structure in front of the Yesler Hall, what was that?
We don't know.
I didn't hear you.
We don't know. It's a little
I
shack.
mean, it's in the street, sort of.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of in the street.
Like a newspaper?
I don't know what it is.
Gathering spot,
I don't know. I've often wondered that. You're the first person to ever ask that.
Oh, you're not, but we just have to say.
I mean, that I heard, the first person I've ever heard ask that, or even give any thought to it at all.
Well, it's very difficult to get perspective on it because of the snow.
That's right.
Well, this is another photo looking up the waterfront from, and we just, Paul and I coming here, drove down right past this, and I pointed out how the changes of Coleman Dock, and so what we're about to see is something that is being torn down in our modern photo. But this was also taken by our great Norwegian photographer, and looking north up the waterfront, and it's right around when the gold rush. When they were loading up vessels to head up to Alaska, and there's a wonderful little sign here which says portable aluminum houses, just the thing for Alaska, weight 150 pounds. So that was portable in 1899.
They were manly men.
And there we are today. Now, there's so many things that are gone or disappearing in this photo. This cabbie's no longer there. The Marion Street overpass has been replaced by, the pedestrian overpass is now a Columbian Street pedestrian overpass. That subway is gone. This is being torn down, so we've lost the viaduct, the pedestrian walkway, and that whole main section of Coleman Dock, which is now being torn down and replaced. So that's only a couple years old as well. Well, here when Anders Vilse got back to Norway, he became sort of the Asher Curtis, the Ansel Adams of Norway, and took some magnificent portraits of landscape and people in the landscape, and lived a fairly long life. But he was celebrated in his photography ended up on stamps in 2015 in Norway. So there's a whole series of his stamps, but he's pretty remarkable, so kind of a hero. Now here we are. We're at about the 35th floor of the almost completed Smith Tower. So we're not up to the top, we're not at the observation deck. The photographer, Frank Noel, went up to 35 floors, took the elevator up, and looking through the as yet unfinished outside skin. He's actually looking straight through and across. It's the first view from that perspective, and it's kind of surprising because you see things that are fairly, you see St. James up here, you see the Rainier Club, the Methodists down here, their dome, and up here, Queen Anne High School, there's Queen Anne, and here's Paul's old neighborhood, Wallingford. And so it was kind of a surprising and shocking view, and Frank Noel was one of the first to get up that high and take this picture. And within a year, Smith Tower opened and the observation deck was, anyone could go up there and see from an even higher perspective.
That's the ordinary ridge, the one to the left there.
Bottom
the big
left?
one, the big one.
Yes, I think you're right. It's because we're looking up,
Yeah.
we are looking up, so this is 3rd Avenue, 2nd is right down here, and because he's looking up to the north. So we're just kind of right, and there's 4th and the Rainier Club up there. So when we go back,
What was your question?
No, I was gonna say, it seems like a lot of buildings for that thing.
it was a lot. Seattle was a boom town. You know, after the fire, we really grew quickly and had you know, quite a substantial population by 1913. So
Look at that, yeah.
it was, you know,
Look at what?
I just look at all those buildings, yeah, I mean, it just kind of.
Yeah.
we were a boomlet.
Is that a regrade project or something there?
This is this is a, what did they tear down here, Paul?
That was the old hotel, the hotel that was put up after the fire, of wood very quickly, because they were afraid nobody had a place to stay when they rebuilt the city. And it was only there for about 12, 15 years. And it turned into a home for single women, you know, who worked downtown, and then it was torn down pretty quickly. I think it only lasted about 20 years, but it was huge.
Yeah.
Big place. Between 5th and 6th, and Marion and, not Marion, yeah, Marion and Columbia, yeah.
Now in our modern
I should get
retail,
I deserve hot chocolate with that.
Would anyone else like a chocolate? We've got
Why
more
don't you guys have
chocolate.
chocolate? Look at there's chocolates here.
Bring them out here, pass them on back.
Enjoy some chocolates.
Okay.
Come on.
There we go. More chocolates, anyone? Another chocolate? I can, oh, here we go. Here we go. From Paul.
Quick catch. Anybody chocolate? Chocolate?
We've been sending them back. Okay, so now let's go to our modern shot. And I want you to pay attention, in particular, to the Rainier Club. It's just nestled in there, and watch what happens. And watch for Lake Union and Queen Anne as well. Let's see what happens, though. Here we go. Whoops. So that's kind of filled up the space, but if you...
Central building's still there.
The
That's
central
right in the
building,
middle, yeah.
right at the heart of it,
Oh, wow.
there's the Rainier Club.
That guy's important. One of the lawyers in that building gave me my first job as a sleuth investigator for a case. And I really lived off of that, more than off of the stuff I wrote. Well, the Times doesn't pay anything, so that's, I lived off of that research for many years. My wife always thought that I should quit.
And just do real estate research for
move out of
lawyers.
her house.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is 1931, and it's the Monongahela leaving Lake Union right before they close the girders up of the Aurora Bridge. And as it's leaving, Monongahela's been in Lake Union for about 4 years. It was one of the last four masters, and they were towing it out, and you can see the tug pulling it out, and it's being towed out to, it ended up off of Vancouver as a logging scow and finally disappeared. But that was its last appearance in Seattle, being towed out of Lake Union, where it had sat for 4 or 5 years. And they knew they'd have to chop down those masts.
Are you going to show the now shot?
I'm about to.
I'm going
yeah.
to make a point of it, so, all right?
Okay.
Now, my point is this. Go ahead. Isn't that lovely? Now, one of the things that Jean did when he chose the historical photos, he had the contemporary ones in mind because he was going to go out and shoot them. And he had special amount of time because he didn't produce the book that quickly. It took about 2.5 years to go get now shots that were really picturesque, really lovely works. And this is an example of that, like those boats and the clouds and a beautiful sweep of the bridge that we all recognize. So
I tried.
Let's give him an applause for the work he did.
Thank you, Paul. And just so I want to point out, again, it's like the snow shot. I tried my best to find a tall masted ship, and there it is. And that actually, they had to raise the Fremont Bridge for that boat. So over my left shoulder, I can hear the bridge. It's awaiting, but that's as close as I could get to the Monongahela.
Yeah. Wow.
So, now, if we go up, first let's take a look at something that is significant in that this is a telegraph key, and it's called the Taft key. It was given to President Taft by George Carmack, who actually had the first claim in the Yukon. And he took a slab, it was a Seattle miner, and he took a slab of Alaskan marble, and he surrounded it with 20-odd nuggets from his claim, but this is all solid gold from his claim in the Yukon. And he gave the telegraph key to Taft to use to open up the 1909 Alaska-Yukon Pacific Exposition. So in 1909, Taft pressed the key, and the celebrations went off, and everyone cheered, and the AYP opened. Well, it was used again in 1932 on February 22nd with the opening of the George Washington Memorial Bridge, and we just watched the Monongahela go below the bridge on the occasion of Washington's 200th birthday was the date that it was opened.
Oh, wait a second. When were you born? What year?
1923.
Do you remember any of this, Aurora?
I remember the bridge being built, but I don't remember this. But I'll tell you one thing that you really saw in those days: all the men wore a hat.
Yes, they certainly did. Even the construction guys had their little fedoras on.
Yeah, and these days, nobody wears a
Nobody
hat.
wears a hat. Well, there you got a hat wearer right next to you. We
doing
got a
it.
couple of hats in the three,
Times
but
are
it's true.
changing.
Times have changed.
Yeah.
So, and you can see, in fact, this is perfect illustration, because every man in this crowd is wearing a hat.
Yeah.
Well,
The
this
guys that
was,
sold hats made a good living.
I had my grandpa's hat for a long time, and it finally rotted away, but it was a beautiful, beautiful thing.
It looks like most of the women also are wearing hats.
There's a lot of hat-wearing women. They
And
were
gloves.
more, men and women were, you know, they had a greater sense of sort of covering and propriety at that point, so. Well, this is the George Washington's 200th birthday, and it's the opening day of the Aurora Bridge. And Roland Hartley was our governor at the time, and he was opposed, the irony being that he was deeply opposed to the whole notion of interstate highways, and he was from Everett. He just did not want, you know, to have roads he thought this was too expensive, and
More relevant is he was a Republican.
he was a Republican from Everett. So at 2:57, Herbert Hoover was waiting, his finger perched above the Taft key, waiting to press the key, and Hartley stood up on the dais and took credit for this beautiful bridge, because there were thousands of people lined up. So of course the governor is going to bloviate and talk about what a wonderful bridge this is, that he had long opposed. Well, he's launched into his speech. He's probably 10-15 minutes in, and lost track of time, and at 2:57 Hoover pushed the key, and all the fireboats shot off their plumes, and the flags dropped down, and people interrupted Hartley and rushed out onto the bridge cheering, and he never finished his speech. But there are thousands of people coming from either end to meet in the middle.
You can see one of those big flags, you see?
Yeah, it's
On
lovely.
up there, right. That wasn't there all the time. That was used in that event. Wow.
So
And
there
how did
we
you
are
do
today.
this?
Well, there are a lot of locations where you just can't get to the same elevation, and so I have adopted the technique of using a telescopic pole. I can't really put up a drone here, and in many places downtown, they're also forbidden. And so I have a 21-foot long pole that goes right up in the air, and mount my camera on top of it, and then just, you know, shoot away with a remote.
21, and you're 5 feet, probably.
I'm at least 5 feet tall.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, you know what I mean. You can't. So that you get up about 26 feet then. Your
I
camera.
can't, but I can't lift it. That's the only problem.
I've seen you lift those things.
Yeah, but I can't lift and focus and point. Anyway.
Well, if you got enough light, you don't need to focus. You just, as you know yourself, you just shoot it over and over until you get what you
Yeah,
like.
that's true. Well, here's Herbert pressing the Taft key for that on that very occasion in D.C. I don't know where he is, but it's in the boiler room somewhere. And it was used again for the Seattle World's Fair of '62. And there is beautiful full color. There's President Kennedy with his finger on the Taft key, preparing to open the Seattle World's Fair. And we have a column in there which features a young woman named Paula Dahl, who was the 9 millionth visitor to the fair, and was feted. Was her parents up there? You can see how delighted they are, and she got this enormous dog. Here she is today. She's a teacher out in Issaquah, and she proudly keeps the 9 millionth sign on her wall and tells her students the story of being this VIP for the day. Well, I want to call attention to her very, very unhappy sister over her shoulder. So.
Hey,
You
you
didn't
guys
get a
sisters
picture
by
in your,
chance?
a now picture in your book.
You what?
The older sister did not get a now picture.
She
in your
didn't.
book.
Yeah, yeah.
She did not. She was probably still too bitter, you know.
Yeah, right.
Invited. But I think she took the dog. And so it's June 6th, 1889. A hot, blustery afternoon, and This is looking down from First and Spring. And here you can see, whoops, I love this guy. All of this burned down. Everything disappeared. Nobody died except a million rats, they say. But here's a guy standing on top of the wooden Fry Opera House, looking down Madison at the start of the fire, which is right down here. And so you have this big crowd, and you probably all know the story of the failure of the flow of water and the hoses. They tried to pump some out of the sound, and everything just kind of failed. It was also the hydrants were just far enough apart, because they had a hydrant every couple blocks. So the hydrants were just far enough apart that they were trying to string the hoses together, and sometimes they'd be able to get those hoses, to one side of the building and not the other. One of the other effects of the fire is it was the beginning of creating a real, honest-to-good, not only fire department, but Seattle water supply that was dependable. So here we are looking down at the fire in '89, and all of this burned along with about 30 blocks around it. And the cry, the hue and cry that went up the morning after the fire was, "We will rebuild in brick and stone." And if you look down today, you see that that's exactly what we did. So many of these buildings are post-fire built in brick and stone. So, and again, my 21-foot pole gets me up to that spot. Another shot of the fire, and this is an area that probably all of you know very well. And so, this little sort of front, what do you call that, Paul? This kind of column with a...
Let's have somebody in the audience.
What do we call that architecturally? An entrance?
Well,
Portico?
what's that?
Portico?
Portico?
Well, it's that too, yeah, it's got portico to it.
So this is a
I
couple...
think of it as like not a waffle, but a...
Do you know where most of the bricks were made?
Right south of here, right in...
Right next to Airport Way in Spokane. There was a
Right.
great big clay pit there.
Paper here?
You're right, you're right.
Yeah,
There were other places bricks were made, but that was the big place.
yeah. They used to carry it up downtown in wagon loads, horse-drawn wagon
You
loads.
did?
Yeah.
You did?
What?
Did you say they did or you did?
No, they did. A little before my time.
A pretty strong guy.
Yeah.
They used a lot of horsepower.
Yeah.
Well, this is like only in the next...
I wonder how those, it makes you kind of wonder how the Huskies are doing, doesn't it?
Well, we'll find out.
So this is a couple days after the fire, and they're already planning on how they're going to rebuild and what they're going to rebuild. And we'll look at it today, and it takes us... Now,
It's hard to
That-
read that, but
that is actually... That's the front of the structure that we just looked at. It's not the Pioneer Building, which was built in the couple years after the fire. But this, and you guys know what this is. Let's name it now.
The sinking garage.
The sinking ship garage.
Oh.
So the front of that is the same, it's on the same location as this is the front of the old Occidental Hotel, which was then replaced before the parking garage. So we're going to tell this little story by the Seattle Hotel.
Yeah.
So we're looking back. This is 1908. We're looking back before this, 5 years before the Smith Tower rises up behind it. But the Seattle Hotel replaced on the same footprint as the Occidental. There's the Pioneer Building, and in the late 50s, we were preparing for a World's Fair, and a lot of structures were taken down and replaced with more convenient, for the time, structures. And so they took down the Seattle Hotel and replaced it with that lovely sinking ship garage. And there's, our gorgeous Smith Tower behind it.
that's how the builders described it too.
They did, and so we're going to look now at another view of the sinking ship garage. And the builders were especially sensitive, because Paul will tell you.
Look at see those those basket handle windows, fenestration on the, behind it across Desirae.
Yeah, great.
They promised, the locals who were lobbying to have something else happen on that, than that garage. They said, but we're gonna put a top to it that repeats the basket handle curve on the windows. And if you look real close, Gene,
Yeah, I'm pointing at it.
That's so sensitive. Oh,
very sensitive, yeah.
Must be a name for that feature.
The basket handle?
it's an arch.
Well, that's what they call it.
Yeah.
You know, you have to be in the say to know those things.
Well, I think that's a fair replacement for the hotel, you know, I think that's a.
It solved everything.
It did solve everything. Now, it also, interestingly, led, because it was such, it so offended the citizens of Seattle, that one Victor Steinbrook, several years later when the Pike Place Market came under threat and was about to be torn down and replaced, Victor Steinbrook, after whom the park is named at the north end of the market, he led the charge in saving the market, and the battle cry was, don't do to the market what we did to the Seattle Hotel.
Yeah.
And so they point back at the parking garage and say, is that what you want? In the, again, another you know, important organ of your city cut out of the heart of it and replaced with that. So we sacrificed the Seattle Hotel, but we gained the market. We held on to the market, and that was thanks to Mr. Steinbrook. And here is 1907, opening day. Well, it's not opening day, opening year of the market. And today, there it is. And we just came through today because Paul has moved down to the market from his Wallingford house. So walking down here, I was talking
Senior housing.
I was talking to Clay as we were walking in the market, and I said, you know, maybe they should take the cars out and just make it all pedestrian down the main drag
I'll
here.
pay for housing what Social Security gives me every month. It's about $30 difference. So
He has no food, but
Yeah, yeah.
You know, one
But I don't need to
fascinating
eat.
part of that Joe Desimone, you know.
yes, he's
owned-
right next to Joe Desimone Bridge. He's literally 20 feet away.
Well, Nancy here, her parents ran a truck farm
Nancy.
in South Park.
we
and-
have featured Nancy in the column.
Oh, you did?
She's
Yeah.
one of our
Their
stars.
property got sold by Joe Desimone to the Boeing Company for $1. I still can't get over that.
Oh, there's
Oh, you mean he owned it? He had bought it previously from your family?
No,
my
he owned
family
it.
leased it from.
Oh, I see, gotcha.
Nancy's family had to
I
move
should've known.
because
and sold it to
the
Boeing.
Boeing Company took over their truck farm.
And that was not a sale in the sense of,
Well, he wanted to keep workers and businesses here. And this was during the height of the Depression, 1935.
yeah, right.
People were, you know, things were in a bad way economically. So he was doing his best to keep workers in the city.
But you remember those hard times, don't you?
Well, I was around
You
then.
You're a young
I don't-
teenager.
But Boeing has a sign on that little bridge that goes across from the east side to the west side. There's a little sign right in the middle of the bridge that they bought the property for $1 from Joe Desimone
Wow.
for Boeing plant number 2.
Yeah.
Well, that's where we went with Nancy's family, and out in the middle of the parking lot, and took a photo of her family
Oh,
near where their old farm was, but now it's a big parking lot.
How long ago?
Where
was that?
is this? Guesses?
Where the I-5.
East
There
of
we go.
I-5.
It is I-5, and,
I cheated, I read the book.
oh, you
Yeah.
read the book.
Don't do that. You gotta give us something like that, it spoils it, not.
Well, the book has two photos looking up Melrose Place East, and one of them looks down south, and here's the repeat, looking back towards town, and the other looks north. So a Swiss, Austrian or Swiss, you remember Werner Lingenhager was,
I used to know, I don't
he
remember
worked for
anymore.
Boeing, and I think he was
I
Swiss.
don't remember anymore.
And he walked around in the
Little bit
40s
before
and
our time.
50s, and he took photos of things that would disappear.
So,
And I found myself doing that this last year with the viaduct, taking photos as the viaduct, as pieces came down. And Clay and I took a 360-degree video camera and rode down the last commute day of the viaduct. So we have the very last autos on the viaduct.
Did you include that in the show?
I didn't. It's 360 degrees, but you can find it online.
You can?
Yes, yeah. it's
Gene,
on our-
in a sentence or two, can you explain what a 360 video is?
Well, for those who haven't seen them, there are these wonderful little cameras that, very small, and they will take a high quality image all around you. So you have, I'm standing below it, you can see the top of my head, you can see the cars going past, the jets going over, and you can look on your phone or on your computer and just, pull your way through the entire 360-degree environment. So we've been putting in,
What do you mean by pull?
with a mouse, just tug
Drag
through.
your finger.
You can drag your finger, yeah. Or if you have your cell phone, you can do this, and it's virtual reality, so you can look around yourself. So we've been using that to illustrate various environments and how they're changing. Well, this is the corner of 3rd and Union. It's a federal building. It was built in 1908, and it was torn down in 1958. It is the post office. And these are the post office steps. And here are these marvelous columns. It's all sandstone. And in 1958, the powers that be in the city decided that they were just too covered with pigeon shit. And so
I think they
best...
said pigeon poop.
We have a debate about this. We don't know. With various audiences, we sometimes say poop,
Well, maybe we should
crap.
take an election here. The poll.
What should it be?
How many people prefer poop over shit?
How about doo-doo?
Pigeon doo-doo. We could say doo-doo, but I always feel silly when I say doo-doo. Maybe we should just go for the straight Latin and say excrement. Anyway, the pigeons shat on the building, and they decided rather than clean it off that the sandstone was just too degraded by all that pigeon crap. And so what did they do? They tore it down, and they replaced it with what some have called a filing cabinet laying on its side. And it's not a very pretty building. And the nice thing about the old building, the thing I love about it, was people would gather and meet on these steps.
You got pooped on or what?
They might have been pooped on, but it doesn't look like they mind it, You'd say, meet me at the steps, and you'd go to the Seattle steps. It's like saying, meet me at the market, and you go to the pig. Well, people say, meet me at the steps, and they'd go here, and it was a meeting place. And today, there's no meeting place.
There is no there.
You don't say, meet me at the door to the post office.
Wait, didn't you say there was some recent change there?
Oh yeah, if you walk by there today, as Gene said, these now photos quickly become thens. It's sort of dark gray corrugated metal. It's dark. It's really kind of strange.
Yeah.
Corrugation,
They
don't
haven't
care for
improved it.
Pardon?
You don't care for it?
Well, I would much prefer the earlier version, of course.
No, at least we have no pigeons today. So back to now this is Hooverville. It's mid-1930s, 35. We're looking down from the old B.F. Goodrich building, which no longer exists. So we importuned the docs to let me down there and retake this photo. This is about 250 of the 500 houses that were in this section of dockland. You can see Smith Tower perched up in the corner here. So watch that corner and we'll see how that's changed.
Wow.
And there we are. And I'm about 40 feet in the air at the top of a bucket, and we're swaying back and forth.
Isn't that just a few yards away from the stadiums?
It is. It's not far. Stadiums are off to my right. Yep.
If we ever get sick or something, I think he could do the lecture.
I think so too.
Yeah, that'd be more.
Okay, now this is Fremont and 34th, and again, it's like 1940. It's a year before this trolley is to be removed, and it's one of the last trolleys still running up to north. It says Finney on it, so it's going up to Finney Ridge from Fremont. All the trolleys downtown by this point have been replaced by gas-powered buses. And this trolley is one of the last trolleys to go up the hill, and the motorman was a photographer, and he took a picture of this. And behind it, you can see the Fremont Baptist Church, which is still there. And I figured that my job was to go down and find a similar, something of similar import. So one summer, 2017, I went down and this is what I found. So there's no trolley, but we do have two women walking abreast.
Yeah.
For those who haven't been to the Fremont solstice, it's the day in which anyone in Seattle can ride their bicycles naked through the city to get there, and they will not be stopped. And I remember one of the earlier versions of this, of the solstice festival, the parade, I saw a woman walk up to a cop, and she was from like Puyallup, and she said, there's people walking around without clothes. He says, yes ma'am, today it's okay. And he just...
You gotta like this city sometimes. Yeah.
There's a category that Paul described to me when we were first working together that he called ironic photos. And what he means is there are photos that when you look at the old version, and this is from 1906, it's a canoe trip down the Black River. And they've left Lake Washington and they're headed to the Sound. They didn't make it, but they made a fair effort, and this is where they stopped and had a picnic.
The Black River was the, what? Was the
outlet of Lake Washington.
Yeah, the southern end of it.
Well, with the building of the locks and the connecting of Lake Union and Lake Washington and the lake dropped quite several feet, about 12 feet. And so today, there is no more Black River in that location. It burbles up in Tukwila in a couple places, but it's a little swampy effect. You can't really float down it anymore. The Black River was also in its long meanderings, along with the Duwamish, was filled with settlements of the Duwamish tribe. So when the lake was lowered, a lot of tribal villages lost their land and the river next to it, as well as straightening out the Duwamish caused some of the crises that still afflict the tribe today. Well, here we are in that same location, South Rainier. Renton is right over to our right. This is McDonald's. That is Carl of the Brown Bear Car Wash, and the Brown Bear Car Wash is over here. And that's about as much wilderness as we get on South Rainier near Renton. So the Black River has disappeared.
How did you match that one?
Well, they actually, in the original count, this is Paul's doing, in the original account in the paper, they described where they stopped and where they, and where the Black
Near
River...
the outlet of the Cedar, which went into the Black.
Oh, okay.
Where the Black came out of the Cedar, you take a choice.
So there's a little description.
Yeah.
There's a little description, and
So I
so...
must say I did a little bit of, I wondered somewhat if I had enough information to get it right. There wasn't really much of an alternative. I mean, it clearly came out of the south end of the lake, and that was the route out of the south end of the lake, so that was pretty close, I felt.
Yeah.
So
But
here's...
if you want to contest me, go right ahead.
I trust you.
Here is Two Faces that launched 60,000 books. 60,000 books? 40,000?
Volume 1?
Volume 1.
Oh, I don't know. Did I say that? It's probably the truth.
Many, many
I
thousands.
don't lie, really.
So this was on the cover of Paul's very first Seattle Now and Then book, which is
I don't think it was 60,000. I think of 40,000.
40,000. And everybody loved the faces of these kids, and if you've seen them, I think they're collectible nowadays, especially the hardcover version. But it's after a few years of the column, he brought out a lovely history of Seattle, and these two kids are standing in a little bay off of Lake Union. And today, we're looking across to the east, and here, this is Westlake. Not Eastlake, but Westlake.
So this is the southwest corner of Lake Union, which was once, as you can see, part of the lake. But it's no longer that.
Today, these are children of my neighbor, and we went out, and we're several blocks away now from Westlake. Westlake is down to the east of us, so we're kind of up between Westlake and Queen Anne, looking down. But they're standing about the same spot that the lake once covered. This is Tia and Liana, and I took this for a Mohai show we did in 2011, and a year ago I went back with the two of them, now 15 and 16. And there they are today on the same spot. And what's terrifying is that Tia is a Roosevelt Rough Rider. Is that what they are, the Rough Riders? Roosevelt Rough Riders? And she drives. Which is,
What high school did you go to?
What?
What high school did you go to?
Cleveland. I lived 1 block from Cleveland High School.
Oh, yeah, well, it's there,
When I was a little kid, it was a cow trail on 15. Then they graded it with gravel, and then they had wooden gutters on the side. God, wood was plentiful in those days.
yeah.
it was surprising. We've just been working on a column about Seattle water, and the water coming down from the Cedar River until 1992 still used the original wooden pipes. It was only replaced in about a 4-year period between 88 and 92 by the big metal pipes. And so I just was down there last week looking at the little sections of old wooden pipes, and it looks like master barrel stave makers making these 48-inch, or I guess they're 62-inch pipes.
They were wrapped in steel bands.
And they were wrapped in steel bands, and it was really a cunning construction. I said, well, why didn't they replace them earlier? He said, because they were so cheap. It was all old growth, for one thing, so they didn't rot. But it was so much cheaper to continue the wood pipes until 92. So we had wood pipes coming all the way around the bottom of the lake and up from Cedar River till 1992, not 18, 1992. So I found that kind of extraordinary that we had the little. So here we are. We know what this is. This is the Kalakala coming through the locks in the late 40s. We don't know what this event was, but you can look up here and see that the decks are just filled, or it's being towed through the locks, filled with people along the decks. So it's some celebration. Maybe it's been restored and revisited and is being brought back out to the sound. There's Lake Union back here, but all of the windows are filled with folks, and the top decks are filled with people. And now Clay, our editor, is going to tell you a little story about his travels on
Well, how many of you here rode the Kalakala?
I rode it.
1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, it was quite the memorable experience, and I was fortunate to ride it on its last month on the Sound in June of 1967. I was a high school kid in stage band, and we were going to the Olympic College Stage Band Festival in Bremerton. And the upper floors were closed off. There were spider webs everywhere. And what was unforgettable was the sound when the engine started up, because you could feel the walls of the Kalakala. It would make noise. It would go, oh, wah, 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 all the way across the Sound.
Well, I used to visit a relative over at Eagle Harbor, and the ferry for many years used to dock on the south side next to a creosote plant.
Right.
And it wasn't until quite a bit later that they shifted to Winslow. And I don't understand why they
made
they
the
had
shift.
their reasons, for, I guess, for docking on the south side of the bay over there.
Right.
But
Well, it ended
that's
up.
where all the business was, I guess.
Didn't it end up in Eagle Harbor for a while after it was just being stored out there for the Kalakala in ruins, when it was being sent up to Alaska as a fish,
I don't remember, probably used to know. I mean, there was so much history about that vessel that probably its chronology was pretty precise, but I don't remember that.
And it came back to the Seattle waterfront for tours to try to inspire people to contribute money for restoration, but didn't get very far.
No.
And it
Which
died.
is sad.
The
After it was
Kalakala.
brought from Alaska.
Yes.
all our homegrown billionaires, and they couldn't save the Colorado.
Yeah.
I went to two wonderful parties on that ship. That was after it was back here with improvisational jazz bands and old movies, from the silent era. And it was a light show with that. Delightful parties.
Well, I had to go back to the locks and find a comparable image to take, and this one I'm proud of because it was at about 6:37 in the morning that I arrived, and then waited for this vessel to pass through.
Way to go, Gene.
And this was the USS Turner Joy, which is a museum ship out in Bremerton. And it had spent several months being restored and repainted and rehabilitated in Lake Union, and it was being towed back out to its moorage off of Bremerton. Now it turns out, and I only discovered this after taking this picture and even after the book came out, I discovered the Turner Joy was the second battleship, the second destroyer to join the USS Maddox off the coast of Vietnam following the Gulf of Tonkin. So it was, this is the ship that was involved in the beginning of the disastrous war that we fought for a number of years. But it went to the aid of the USS Maddox, and the story's complex and tortured, but suffice it to say, we kind of were shoved into a conflict that, as we know. Well, there it is off the coast of Vietnam, same vessel. And Clay went down to Salty's, and you all know Salty's. We're there right now, and if you just walk outside of Salty's and just down towards the shore a little bit, you will see to this day that this is the wheelhouse of the Kalakala.
The very last day that it was being dismantled, Jerry King, the owner of Salty's, went down to Tacoma and said, I want that, that, and that, and hauled them back up.
So he grabbed this wonderful, the wheelhouse, and the wheelhouse was troubling because, like the Kalakala, it was designed for impact rather than efficiency. So you had to have, whoever was steering the boat had to call out to a deckhand who had to call down to the, it was a rather cumbersome process. And if you look at our ferries today, they have these enormous picture windows, so you can actually see what you're heading towards. Well, Clay also took a lovely photo, and I like this one because it looks back. It's probably similar to some of the views as the Kalakala approached the city.
And then ask Clay if at that moment he took that photo, he had any remembrance or thought of the rumbling of the ship.
Of course, and all of you can go do the same. It's out in the open. Just drive to Salty's, park in the parking lot, and take a look at the wheelhouse.
Oh boy, are you leaving?
Oh, no.
So we're coming, this is the last couple slides coming up here. We have 2 or 3 more comparisons. This is, interestingly, opening day, or just before the cars went out, we had a closing day on it when pedestrians could go out on the Saturday after that final commute, when we could all go out in the beginning of February of this year and walk the viaduct for the last time. Well, this is 2 days before the viaduct opened, which I think is April 4th, 53. And so we're looking at a couple of women in glorious red coats. And Paul and I have featured this in a couple books now. We did the Washington Then and Now. This was our city photo looking from the south in Washington Then and Now. And we repeated it in this book as well. And a year before the viaduct came down, I went back and
Nice.
the red car, huh? So there we are looking at the viaduct. And this view, obviously we can't obtain it anymore. I threw this in to show you approximately that spot. This is the very final structure, the very last, this is only from about 3 weeks ago, just before they took down this last southern portion. There's a little bit left north of Lenora, but this is the last little piece of evidence. And there are those lovely 4 yellow smokestacks which are vents which vent the tunnel beneath. So that's about as close as I can get without, and even my pole doesn't get me up high enough to make a difference. In that original photo, we looked back and we saw this new building up above the Methodist dome. And Clay and Paul and I really like this structure. We've always liked it. It was built by Kevin Daniels, developer Kevin Daniels, who also bought the Methodist dome and turned it into a kind of an event space, which is sort of lovely. But the building itself has this interesting sort of lightning bolt coming down the side. And this is looking down 4th Avenue. But as it turns out, he was inspired by the grace and beauty of a particular actress from a particular movie, and here she is. And it was this photo that as they were putting up the structure that Kevin put in the foyer, in the lobby, as the workers would walk past as they're putting up the building, they'd walk past Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. And she has that same, you know, there's the little lightning rod, the cant of the hips and the shoulders and we throw that in just because it was such a delightful story that we came across. All right, now the oldest house in Seattle, and you guys know it. It's right here. It is in West Seattle. It's up closer to the tip of Alki, but it used to sit on Alki itself, and now has been moved back about a block. And it's a very long block. It is. There's a little plaque if you're down. You can see the plaque at the corner, but nothing in front of the house itself. It was built by Doc Maynard, and it was built after the first house that he built in West Seattle burnt down. So this is early 1860s. It is the oldest structure in Seattle existing today. So these people, Paul got this photo from a very interesting source as well. So straight from Maynard, it ended up being owned by, this is a photo from maybe the 90s, and it was owned by the Hanson family, a family whose descendant you all know as well. So, Paul, will you talk about this?
Ivor Hagelin. Yeah,
What's
his
the
mother
address?
was born here the year that they bought this, within months, and that was
What?
69.
Oh, what's the address of the building?
Oh, it's in the book. I don't remember the
Buy the
address.
book. I'm sorry. You gonna buy the book?
I'm gonna buy one. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
you'll have the address.
So here's Ivor's mom in the white dress, and here is his grandmother, and other family members. I think of this as Snidely Haglund.
Yeah.
And this is a young cousin who's peeing on the side of the house. But this house is still there. This little section has been lopped off a bit, understandably, when it was moved. And there it is today. Now, this is a couple years ago. You could see Southwest Historical Society members gathered here. And here's a neighbor from this house who just joined in with his son. But there's Clay and his flock. He used to preach to them every Wednesday. So today, actually Clay went back just a few days ago and took this photo of the beautifully, I mean, they've done a lovely job. It's been kind of a shabby little place for our oldest structure. So the current owners have actually done something kind of nice into the house itself, giving it a porch and a little wraparound, and so I think they've done it proud.
But it's the roof line that gets you.
Yep.
But it doesn't have the nice.
It doesn't have this additional,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have the curly cues, but it's still, you can walk up, there's the address too, 3045, and what is it,
64th.
64th.
And you can see the plaque in the cement at 64th and Alki.
But it's always been a little surprising that there's not something in front of this house that says, because you go down into the basement and there are the hammer marks on those old beams that were put in, you know, by Maynard himself and his workers. Well, here we come to the last subject of our show, and this is Kiki Soblu, or Princess Angeline, the daughter of Chief Seattle. And a couple of years ago, our column photo archivist who volunteers at MoHI and has become a sort of an indispensable scanner of old photos at MoHI, he and Ron Edge and Paul worked on discovering the location for her house right below Western. And it was not quite known, it was, we knew basically the general location, but through a series of comparing of stumps and eaves and structures from other pictures, Ron sort of zeroed in on one particular location. We were delighted to find in our repeat that Ron in this next photo is sitting right about where Kiki Soblu sat on her front porch with her dog. And so here's Ron. This is the Fix Medor building, which is just north of the Pike stairway. This is the Pike Street parking garage, which Paul lives just above now. And there's Ron sitting about that same spot. And what's kind of lovely about this is it's down this open space. So you looked, it's all closed off. You can't get there. You'd have to climb over the chain link fence below. But looking down from above, and Clay and I just about went to Lowell's today, but looking from the second floor of Lowell's, you can see where Princess Angeline's house was in that. And there's another unmarked location that maybe should have some kind of little something that says, look down, and this is where the daughter of Chief Seattle. Well, here we have her in a photo taken in a very famous photo. We don't know who the photographer was. Taken in the early 1890s, looking up towards the corner of First and Pike. So we're in what is now Post Alley. Then it was just the street headed down towards the waterfront. And we inset her dad for a very particular reason, and it's because we had two descendants come out and sit in the same spot. That's Mary Lou Slaughter, who's the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Kiki Soblu, Princess Angeline. And this is Ken Workman, who's the great-great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle by his second wife.
And Ken grew up here in the Delridge Valley of West Seattle. Went to Cooper School, and he sits on the board of the Southwest Seattle Historical Society.
And they both have some astonishing stories to tell. Ken, in particular, never knew that he was in that lineage until a Mormon friend of his was doing genealogy and said, Ken, look at this. And there was a direct line to Seattle from Ken. And Ken went, whoa, because he knew that he had native bloodline, but he didn't know where it went and how far back it went. But this
and this was just 10 years ago,
Yeah,
and he's learned the Lushootseed language. Can you imagine learning a language at age 50 to 60? Somewhere, I mean.
So and right now he's kind of become a sort of an amazing figure and representative for the Duwamish tribe. But also, talk about Mary Lou. She is, for one thing, look at this woman. She's 80 years old.
Oh, wow.
She's 80. And is not only, she was a beautician, so maybe that explains it. But still, that's, she's also one of the area's chief basket weavers, and she created these cedar shawls and the vest for Ken. And if you go to the Duwamish longhouse, you will see that the floor of the longhouse has been decorated with designs from her baskets. So it's her baskets that they based the parquet flooring of the entire longhouse on.
And that's here in West Seattle too, just down on West Marginal.
Yep. So this is Clay's shot of me shooting the two of them, and while we were shooting, Ken whipped around a couple times. The street wasn't crowded, you know. There were a few people passing behind, and Ken sort of whipped around a couple times, and later and was noticeable. And later we asked him, well, Ken, what's the matter? What was wrong up there? He said, well, I felt a couple times, I felt someone tapping me on the elbow. And And both Ken and Mary Lou think, well, that's a little tap of an ancestral tap, a little of the past coming up through the stones of Post Alley. And I think of it as, whenever I find a spot and a coincidence between an old and a new photo, and find myself looking from that same position of the old photographer, I feel that same tap in somewhere inside. It's kind of a satisfying clunk. But for Ken, it was he describes it like this. It was a definite tap on the elbow. And so it's kind of I love that story that he tells. And that is it. There's Paul on top of Gasworks.
That's the back cover of the book.
The back cover of our book. So thank you so much for coming. And Paul, you want another chocolate? Why not?
I'm going to promote the welfare of your cousins and nephews in Peoria, Illinois, and Nashville, Tennessee.
Where's
Want to
your hat
share this,
today?
huh?
Where's your hat today?
Am I wearing a
Never
hat
seen you
today?
without a hat.
Yeah.
Where is your hat today?
No, you guys don't interrupt me.
Yeah, I brought a picture you might be interested in.
Okay.
My dad used to work for the Great Northern Pacific at Kingsley State. And
Hold that up, Paul.
1929. I think this is a combination of day and swing shifts gathered on the cross walk.
Can I tell you something real quick?
Gene, can you hold that up?
Let's hold this up, but I want to tell you an interesting story. This photo is.
Can you scoot a little that way?
Yeah, let's see if I can hold it out.
And-
I'll be very gentle.
I'll hold it.
I'll be gentle and hold it
But-
up.
but-
Well, I took it to Mohi,
There we
and
go.
they made a
copy of it.
a negative out of it,
Wow.
and then they blew it up into a 13 by 60 inch.
Scoot over this way and down.
It's an extraordinary photo.
Good.
Now, what's particularly interesting about this, and that you should bring it in, is that there is a wonderful journalist and friend of the column, a guy named Casey McNerthy, who works for Cairo TV. And Casey found a copy of this photo in Portland and found that his great-grandfather, and I can point him out if I have three hands, is in the photo.
My dad is in there.
Your dad's in there too? Well, so Casey, his granddad, Matt, great-granddad, was in the photo, an Irish guy. There's also like 12 African-American guys in this picture. This is taken October 2nd, 3 weeks before the stock market crashed, before Black...
Where's your dad? Better look like you.
Right here.
Wow.
And his helper was Old Tom, a black guy. They were airbrake mechanics. And another interesting thing about this is that this is a Great Northern engine, Northern
Right.
Pacific observations, Great Northern, Northern Pacific, Great Northern, Northern Pacific.
Wow.
They alternated on the tracks.
That's great. Well, there's 6 tracks here, and I actually went back with Casey and his extended family to reshoot a family photo of
I
this.
had him with you.
I should have, but I didn't know you were in it. So we went back, and it's right down near where the stadium is now. It's just it's where the tracks run alongside the stadium, looking south.
Have you published that, G? The then and now?
Not yet. This is coming up for Thanksgiving. It's our family story for Thanksgiving. So, well, why not? It's a wonderful shot, and I love this picture. It's so. And if you look close, and you should take a look close, and you'll see that in every engine, there's a woman standing, kind of gracing each of the. And I don't know who the women were, but
They were all cleaning women.
they were the cleaning women in the engine.
And a lot of those workers were white Russians that came across and got jobs here after the
Wow.
the communists took over.
Right. So they were coming. Well, and there were a number of. If you know the actor Matt Smith, his relative is in this photo as well. So there's a whole slew of Seattle people who are, and a lot of Irish descendants here too. So Casey's great-granddad came over to the States in 1911, and he met his wife before this photo was taken in 1916, who had just escaped from the Easter uprising, and she was one of the rebels who was wanted by the Irish government. So she came over and married the guy in this photo, and they had many offshoots, many of whom still live in Seattle. So that's a fascinating.
All the walkways were made out of wood, and the carts were heavy tools, you know.
Right.
And they would rot and they'd fall through, you know, and so they were constantly replacing the boards all the time. Eventually, they finally got around to blacktopping everything.
So did you visit your dad down on the
I even worked
in the
down there
yards?
myself.
Did you really?
Yeah, back in the 40s.
Too bad
Wow.
you didn't have them there for the picture. We'll put you in, take a picture and put them in the,
We'll take a picture.
in
Yeah,
the-
that's
put it in
great.
the- what do we used to call it, the
The
blog?
blog.
Yeah, I got an extra page.
Oh, yeah.
We forgot about it.
I had 2 write-ups that I gave to the Bowline. You can have one of these.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Now, why don't you hold that out, he'll take a picture of you holding it.
Oh, okay.
Come on now.
Sure. Well, and we'll also, and if you guys, you don't have to, if you have any other questions, we'd be happy to take a shot. So, otherwise,
I have a question.
Paul has a
Are you
question.
guys sisters?
Nope, just friends.
What sort of similar?
That's a great compliment, thank you.
Can I get your phone number, Emma?
Yeah, 206
Uh-huh.
932
Yeah.
3270.
And tell her we are great, is it
Oh, that's wonderful.
great-grandfather? Great.
That is great. It fills a lot of gaps because, you know, you experienced these yards, so you
Yeah, I worked there in 2 different periods. When I was a teenager, I got a job there as a cleaning person. And one guy showed me about a half an hour how to clean one of those cars. And the worst part of it was cleaning out the spittoons.
Oh, I bet.
And then I was an
That must-
electrician's helper during the war, early part of the war.
Wow. During the war?
Yeah, during the early part of the war, there were long troop parades, north and south of the crossbar.
Right. Wow.
Then he was recruited and served in the.
And then you,
Yeah, I
when
spent-
did you go?
I was 3.5 years in the service during the
Wow.
Second World War.
Were you in the Pacific or?
Yeah. I started out in an aircraft, and I went to officers' candidate school. When I got out, there were too many of us, so I got transferred to the combat engineers. I spent most of my time with them in the Pacific. I was in 2 battles in the Palau Islands and Leyte in the Philippines, and then I wound up in the Army of Occupation in Japan for 9 months.
Wow. So after.
And my outfit broke up, so I joined the 11th Airborne, so I became a paratrooper. I was in the aircraft, and I was in the combat engineers, and I ended up as a paratrooper.
Wow. Great stories.
They gave you additional pay, and it was fun to jump.
Everybody,
Mary has a connection to.
Yeah, my great-great-great-grandfather was Doc Maynard.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
Well, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, you need to
Paul.
you need to start hanging out with
Love your
Ken.
work.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and
Not much of it anymore, but I'm working on another book.
I knew you would. I've got a whole stack on my home already.
He said he's such a wonderful guy.
such a wonderful
Great.
guy.
Very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Great to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Stay safe.
Is this to anybody?
To myself.
Your dog?
No, you can just leave a sign, that's great. Because I don't need it.
You know, this increases the value of the book by 20 cents?
I think 20
10
cents.
cents a piece.
I'll take it. Thank you so much, it was a wonderful presentation.
It's more than a day's work. I've been a fan of your
Oh, the free,
collaborative
those
effort
clinics,
for many
yes, I
years
do
now,
know
so-
about those, yeah.
Do we say this is to somebody?
Sure, you said to Max, my name.
And so now
M-A-
they just showed
M-A-X,
us the
yeah.
film last weekend, and so now we're trying to bring it here to see if we can bring.
This is to your
more
folks?
people to come volunteer.
You don't have to personalize that one, I'm not sure, but I'm gonna give it to you.
Oh, yeah, right.
Depends if I still like them by Christmas.
Always, yeah, always best to just,
Exactly.
these
Oh, that
situations.
would be,
There you go.
yeah, that'd be
Here's
better.
Max. This is just for
Thanks,
signature.
Keith Oberman
He
of
doesn't,
Nemesis
Max doesn't know who he's giving it
I'm
to,
not
so
gonna write back
I'm
the
gonna wait.
story.
leave it unsigned.
I will decide later.
Just to Jim? Sure. Seattle native?
Yes, I am.
Well, there we go.
Oh, yeah, he'll be, he's the one, first one who brought one home. The now and then that we
To
had
Jim and
from
Kathy?
before. And then and now, he's the one that brought it home. Oh, so, yeah.
Oh, you know what, so we have.
Are you Seattle native, Kathy?
According to like old, they finally sold it, so they've
Well, I've
developed
been
it,
there
but
long
only
enough
been
to
this year
feel
for the
it.
nice.
Still
It's
been
never
writing
long
well?
because nobody touched it.
You
Like,
write?
it
Next
was-
year's a year.
Oh, I read a few articles, I even had a couple of them
Yeah,
printed
and
in
so
the
we shall
Seattle
see
Times,
because going on your
Rum Night paper, and
Oh, okay.
even the West Seattle Herald.
So hopefully that'll be my opportunity
writing.
for.
Well, I gave him an account of that picture, you can read that.
Yeah, anyway.
I left that with Mohai. Well, I got a date with my lady friend who's 99.
Yeah, well, it's
You gotta
interesting.
go.
I mean,
Yeah, I'm
like,
gonna pay for this and take off. It's
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
awfully nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
nice.
I feel
Thanks.
kind of sad.